Yes, sir. At once. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Acknowledge.
Yes, acknowledge. Affirmative.
Report. Affirmative. Report. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Acknowledge.
Comrade, affirmative.
Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Acknowledge.
Reporting. Affirmative.
Very well. At once. Ready and waiting. Yes, sir. Orders. Affirmative. Reporting. Waiting. Reporting. Agreed. Ready and waiting. Agreed. Reporting orders. Affirmative. Reporting orders. Acknowledge.
Reporting. Acknowledge. 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 Yes, acknowledge.
Vehicle reporting. Acknowledge. Affirmative.
Waiting order. Acknowledge. Waiting order. Affirmative. Order. Waiting order.
Waiting order. Reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledge. Affirmative.
Reporting.
Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Reporting. Acknowledge. Yes, sir. Reporting.
Acknowledge.
Affirmative. Waiting. Ready and waiting. Once. Yes, awaiting orders. Orders. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Very well. As you wish. Of course. Acknowledged. Of course. Agreed. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Vehicle reporting. Reporting orders. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Report. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Vehicle reporting.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Waiting orders. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Waiting orders. Very well. Very well. At once. Agreed. Agreed. At once. Affirmative. Very well.
Reporting.
Vehicle reporting.
Reporting. Affirmative. Reporting. Acknowledged.
Warning,
Acknowledged.
3 minutes remaining.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Awaiting orders. Acknowledged.
Comrade. Acknowledged. 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 Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Agreed.
Warning, 2 minutes
As you.
remaining.
Affirmative. As you wish. Ready and waiting orders. At once.
Comrade. Acknowledged. Reporting. Affirmative.
Ready and waiting.
Warning,
Once.
1
Ready and
minute
waiting.
remaining.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Reporting.
Waiting. Affirmative. 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 Affirmative.
Awaiting orders.
Comrade. Waiting.
Timer
Reporting.
started.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Reporting.
Waiting
Ready and
orders.
waiting.
Reporting.
Waiting order. Yes, affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Yes, sir. Waiting. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Reporters. Waiting orders. Ready. Reporting. Affirmative. Very well. At once.
Waiting order. Reporting. Yes, sir.
Awaiting orders.
Yes, sir.
Reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Recording orders.
Waiting order. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Reporting.
Ready and waiting. Waiting orders. Very well. Very well. As you wish. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Waiting order.
Reporting. As you wish. Of course. Agreed.
Warning, 5 minutes remaining.
Agreed. At once. Affirmative. As you wish. As you wish. Very well. As you wish. Of course. Affirmative. Affirmative. Of course. Agreed. As you wish. Of course. Very well.
Waiting order.
Awaiting orders.
Warning, 4 minutes remaining.
Awaiting orders. Affirmative. 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 Awaiting order.
Warning, 5 minutes remaining.
Yes, sir. Of course.
Waiting order. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Orders. Agreed. Yes, sir. Reporters.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Warning, 4
Acknowledged.
minutes remaining.
Waiting order. Acknowledged. Agreed. Vehicle reporters. Reporting. Waiting. Agreed.
Warning, 3 minutes remaining.
Ready orders. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. As you wish. At once.
Reporting. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Warning, 2 minutes remaining.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Warning, 1 minute remaining.
Waiting order.
Repairing.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Unit
Reporting.
repaired.
Waiting order.
Repairing. Unit repaired.
Comrade. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Repairing. Unit repaired.
Waiting order. Waiting order. Waiting order. Acknowledged.
Vehicle reporters.
Repairing. Unit repaired. Repairing. Unit repaired.
Waiting order. Waiting order.
Repairing. Unit repaired.
Affirmative. Comrade order. Affirmative. Waiting order.
Warning, 5 minutes remaining.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Reporting. At once. Ready and waiting. As you wish. Waiting
At
orders. Yes, sir.
Warning, 4 minutes remaining.
Yes, sir. At once. Reporting. Waiting orders. Affirmative. Vehicle reporting.
Waiting
Ready and
orders.
waiting. Course.
Comrade. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Warning, 3 minutes remaining.
Waiting order.
Vehicle reporting. Awaiting orders.
Yes, acknowledged.
Warning, 2 minutes remaining.
Waiting orders. Waiting orders. Waiting orders. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Waiting order. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Warning, 1 minute remaining.
Acknowledged.
Time
Ready and waiting.
started.
Comrade order. Affirmative. Waiting order. Acknowledged. Yes, affirmative. Waiting order. Affirmative. Waiting order. Waiting order. Comrade. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Waiting order. Waiting affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Warning, 5 minutes remaining. Warning, 4 minutes remaining.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Warning, 3 minutes remaining.
Comrade. Affirmative. Waiting order. Waiting order. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Warning, 2 minutes remaining.
Affirmative.
Warning, 1 minute remaining.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Time started.
Comrade.
Ready for affirmative.
Waiting order. Waiting order. Yeah, acknowledged. Yes, waiting order. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Ready and waiting.
Waiting order. Acknowledged.
Reporting orders. Reporting orders.
Comrade, yes, sir. Order.
Warning, 5 minutes remaining. Warning, 4 minutes
Waiting order.
remaining.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Warning, 3 minutes remaining.
Comrade. Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Warning, 2 minutes remaining.
Ready and waiting.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Warning, 1 minute remaining.
Comrade.
Reporting. Very well.
Time
Waiting
started.
orders.
Waiting order. Acknowledged. Reporting. Affirmative.
Reporting orders. Waiting orders.
Yes, sir. Waiting order. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Waiting affirmative.
Warning, 5 minutes remaining. Warning, 4 minutes remaining.
Waiting order. Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders. Affirmative.
Warning, 3 minutes remaining.
Waiting order. Acknowledged.
Awaiting. Agreed.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Affirmative.
Waiting order.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Waiting order.
Warning,
Acknowledged.
2
Report
minutes
acknowledged.
remaining.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Reporting. Affirmative.
Warning, 1 minute remaining.
Waiting order. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Timer
Reporting.
started.
Yes, sir. Reporting. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Our base is under attack.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Reporting. Of course. Agreed. Very well. Affirmative. Of course. Acknowledged. Awaiting orders. Awaiting orders. Of course. Affirmative. Very well. Very well. Acknowledged. Very well. Very well. Very well. Acknowledged. At once. Agreed. Reporting. Ready and waiting. Vehicle reporting. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Waiting orders. Acknowledged. Reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Waiting orders. Yes, sir. Ready and waiting. Acknowledged. Reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Affirmative.
Warning.
Acknowledged.
5 minutes remaining.
Comrade. Acknowledged.
Reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Comrade. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Comrade.
Warning.
Acknowledged.
4
Affirmative.
minutes remaining.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative.
Warning. 3
Awaiting
minutes
orders.
remaining.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Vehicle reporting.
Affirmative.
Affirmative. Yes, sir. Reporting. Vehicle reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Reporting. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Reporters. Acknowledged.
Reporting.
Warning. 2 minutes
Affirmative.
remaining.
Affirmative.
Waiting orders. Acknowledged. Very well. Yes, sir. Reporters. Waiting orders. Of course. Affirmative. Of course. Agree. Affirmative.
Waiting order. Affirmative.
Warning. 1 minute
Vehicle
remaining.
report. Acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Unit repaired. Repaired.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
repaired.
Affirmative. Awaiting. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Waiting order.
Timer started.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Waiting order.
Acknowledged.
Waiting order.
Affirmative.
Reporting. Waiting order. Affirmative. Comrade. Affirmative.
Awaiting orders. As you wish. Acknowledged. Reporting. Affirmative. Reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Orders. Acknowledged. Ready and waiting. Of course. At once. Acknowledged. Awaiting orders.
Waiting order. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders.
Waiting. Comrade. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Reporting.
Preparing.
Affirmative.
Unit prepared. Repaired.
Waiting order.
Unit
Acknowledged.
prepared.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Yes, sir. Agreed.
Warning.
Comrade.
5 minutes remaining.
Affirmative.
Ready and waiting. Ready and waiting. At once.
reporting.
Warning, 4 minutes remaining.
Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Acknowledged.
Prepared.
Affirmative.
Unit prepared.
Awaiting orders.
Unit prepared. Reinforcements have arrived. Warning, 3 minutes
Report.
remaining. Timer stopped.
Acknowledged.
Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Reporting. Of course. Reporting.
Affirmative. Yes, sir. Order. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Waiting order. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Reporting. Reporting. Awaiting orders. Vehicle reporting. Reporting. At once.
Comrade. Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Comrade. Waiting order. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Awaiting orders.
Yes, yes. Waiting order. Acknowledged.
Reporting.
Comrade. Acknowledged. Comrade. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Vehicle reporting. Vehicle reporting. Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. At once. Very well. Very well. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. As you wish. As you wish. Awaiting orders. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Ready and waiting. Agreed. As you wish. Very well. As you wish. At once. Of course. Acknowledged. Affirmative. At once. Yes, sir. Report.
Waiting order.
Awaiting orders. Vehicle reporting. Orders. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Reporting. As you wish. Agreed. Very well. Of course. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Reporting. At once. Yes, sir. Reporting. Awaiting orders. Yes, sir. Ready and waiting. Affirmative.
Waiting order. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Ready and waiting. As you wish. Affirmative.
Affirmative.
Awaiting orders.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Engineering now. Yes, sir.
Reporting. Waiting orders.
Comrade.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Reporting. Reporting.
Acknowledged.
Comrade.
Acknowledged.
Reporting. Acknowledged. Reporting.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Agree. Affirmative. Agree. At once.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Acknowledged.
Reinforcements have
Yes,
arrived.
sir. Affirmative. Waiting on. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Reporting.
Yes, comrade. Order.
Reporting. Reporting. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Reporters. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Awaiting orders. Vehicle reporting. Affirmative.
Comrade. Affirmative.
Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Our base is under attack.
Reporting. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. 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 Acknowledged.
Reporting. Comrade.
Awaiting
Yes, sir.
orders. Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Affirmative.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Waiting.
Reporting orders. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Vehicle reporting orders. Affirmative. Reporting.
Affirmative. Affirmative.
Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Vehicle acknowledged. Yes, sir. Orders. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Reporting. Acknowledged. Awaiting. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Waiting. Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Waiting order.
Yes, sir. As you wish. Vehicle reporting. Waiting orders. Report acknowledged. Vehicle report. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Acknowledge. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Affirmative.
Acknowledge. Acknowledged.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Reporting. Awaiting orders.
Acknowledged.
Agreed.
Our base is under attack.
As you wish. At once. Vehicle reporting. Await. Vehicle reporting. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Acknowledged.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders. Awaiting orders.
Waiting
Report.
order.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Reporting. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Waiting order. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Awaiting orders.
Yes, sir. Comrade.
Acknowledged. Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Awaiting orders. Vehicle report, yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
At once. Vehicle orders. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Vehicle report. Affirmative.
Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Report acknowledged. Reporting orders. Affirmative. Reporting. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Agreed. Acknowledged. 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 Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Reporting. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Reporting. Reporting. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Orders. Acknowledged.
Comrade. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Awaiting orders.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Vehicle reporting. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Reporting. At once. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Awaiting orders.
Comrade.
Affirmative.
Comrade.
Reporting. Awaiting orders. Of course. Affirmative.
Our base is under attack.
Awaiting orders. Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Report acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Report acknowledged.
Reporting. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Ready and waiting. Of course.
Reporting. Reporting. Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders. Yes, sir. Reporting. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Reporting. Report. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Awaiting orders. Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Awaiting orders. At once. Awaiting orders. Report acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Our base is under attack.
Reporting. Yes, sir. Orders. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Waiting order.
Yes, sir. Reporters. Affirmative.
Waiting order. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Comrade. Acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Vehicle reporting. Vehicle reporting. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Affirmative. Vehicle report. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Awaiting orders. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Ready and waiting. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Report. Report. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Wait. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Ready and waiting orders.
Mission failed.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Yes. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Acknowledged.
Our base is under attack.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Team quarters. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Affirmative.
Waiting orders, comrade. Affirmative.
Report. Acknowledge. Yes, sir. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Reporting.
Reporting. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge.
Waiting order. Acknowledged.
Reporting. Awaiting orders.
Waiting order.
Yes, sir. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Reporting. Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Report. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Reporting. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Reporting. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Reporting. Reporting.
Waiting order.
Reporting orders.
Comrade.
Yes, sir. Vehicle reporting.
Waiting order. Comrade.
Awaiting orders. Affirmative.
Waiting order. Comrade.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Vehicle
Comrade.
reporting.
Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Comrade. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge.
Waiting order.
Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Vehicle report. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Vehicle reporters. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge.
Waiting order. Affirmative.
Vehicle reporting. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative. Vehicle report. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Yes, sir. Acknowledge. Awaiting. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledge. Yes, sir. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge.
starting.
Vehicle reporting. Affirmative. Vehicle Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Mission accomplished.